GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Hello and welcome. This is Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Today, we'll be discussing Rishi Sunak's vows to stop small boat crossings again. Sue Gray may have broken civil service rules if she failed to declare her meetings with Labour. And we'll be delving into the latest from the lockdown files. But first, here's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Calvin, thank you and good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The former health secretary wanted to, quote, frighten the pants off everyone, according to leaked messages sent during the COVID pandemic. The latest WhatsApp conversation, published in the Sunday Telegraph, shows Matt Hancock discussing how to use another strain of the COVID virus to scare the public. Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Jonathan Ashworth told us Mr Hancock's political career is over.
I think the key thing is that he accounts for himself in front of an inquiry. It comes back to this point, doesn't it? Why we need this inquiry to take place quickly. A lot of people lost their lives. There's a lot of people who think that the way in which lockdowns operated has had long-term implications on all kinds of fronts. Everybody wants an inquiry because everybody wants to be able to see the evidence, to be able to debate it properly and calmly, and it's why we need to get on with it.
Rail passengers could see their season ticket go up by hundreds of pounds from today, in the largest train fare hike for more than a decade. Regulated ticket prices across England and Wales are rising by an average of 5.9%. That's despite strikes and cancellations that have brought parts of the UK to a standstill. Rail Minister Hugh Merriman says the increase is below inflation, but Labour have called it savage. The Independent's travel correspondent, Simon Calder, said it isn't fair with the level of services currently being provided.
The taxpayer who really doesn't want to pay more for what, frankly, is quite a lousy service. We heard last week, for example, that that the number of cancellations on the day is at the highest it's ever been since records began. So people are quite frankly thinking, yep, it's we're paying more and we're getting less.
Prince Harry has defended his previous use of drugs, saying some of them helped him mentally. During an interview, he spoke to trauma expert Dr. Gabor Mate, who diagnosed him with attention deficit disorder. In his memoir, Spare, Harry admitted taking drugs on a regular basis, saying he used marijuana in 2015 whilst living in the grounds of Kensington Palace. COVID vaccine manufacturer Moderna has announced its new base will be built in Oxfordshire. The Moderna Innovation and Technology Centre will be based in Harwell to help develop mRNA vaccines for respiratory diseases, including future variants of COVID. The move is set to create hundreds of jobs in construction, as well as within the manufacturing facility, which is expected to open in 2025. Now, clashes have broken out in Athens between police and demonstrators over a train crash that killed 57 people. Protesters hurled objects, including petrol bombs, while police responded with tear gas and hand grenades. Following protests over the past 3 days, thousands of university students and railway workers took to the streets to voice their anger over safety standards on the rail network. More than 350 people were on board the train when it crashed head-on into a freight train last Tuesday. It's the deadliest train crash in Greece's history, while the government has vowed to investigate and improve rail safety. And more than 100 nations have completed an historic pact to protect the world's oceans. The legally binding High Seas Treaty aims to put 30% of seas into protected areas by 2030. Very little of the high seas is subject to any protection, with pollution and overfishing posing a growing threat. Environmental groups say the agreement will help reverse marine losses and ensure sustainable development. Notorious prisoner Charles Bronson will make another bid to get out of jail this week in a public parole hearing. He's been behind bars for most of the last 50 years for crimes such as hostage-taking and armed robbery. Proceedings will be live-streamed on Wednesday with a final hearing behind closed doors on Friday. He says he wants to be released to enjoy what's left of his life. The Prince's Foundation, founded by the King, has partnered with luxury fashion brand Chanel to launch an embroidery course for students. 6 university graduates will be selected, receiving bursaries for living costs during the 24-week programme. Held at the King's Highgrove home in Gloucestershire, it aims to equip and prepare aspiring designers. And venues across England and Wales will be open later over the King's coronation weekend in May. Pubs, clubs and bars will serve customers for an extra 2 hours between the 5th and the 7th of May. The Home Secretary says it's so that people can have the time to enjoy an extra pint or two. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Calvin.
Hello and welcome to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson. Here's what's coming up this afternoon. Enough is enough. Those are the words of Home Secretary Suella Braverman writing in The Sun today as she and the Prime Minister vow to stop small boat crossings in the Channel by telling those who arrive, quote, "If you come here illegally, you will not be able to stay." We've heard that before. Then, in the wake of the revelations coming out of the lockdown files this week, I spoke with historian Dr. David Starkey to discuss the history of civil liberties. That's coming up at 20 past. And of course, we'll be breaking down the latest findings from Matt Hancock's leaked WhatsApp messages. Today, the Telegraph revealed how the former health secretary hoped to shock public into complying with the ever-changing lockdown rules. And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or by tweeting @gbnews. Desmond. The Prime Minister is set to announce new laws to clamp down on migrant crossings. Sunak says he and senior aides at the Home Office have drawn up new laws to stop lawyers using the right to family life and legislation created to combat modern slavery to stop their clients being deported. And writing in The Sun on Sunday, Home Secretary Suella Braverman says enough is enough. The British people want this solved. They're sick of tough talk and inadequate action. We must stop the boats, she said. The law would give powers to the Home Secretary to remove anyone who arrives on a small boat as soon as reasonably practical, to Rwanda or to a safe third-party country. Joining me now to discuss this is broadcaster Darren Grimes and former editor of the Labour List, Peter Edwards. Darren, This is an announcement about an announcement, is it not? I mean, I'm bored of these announcements.
Indeed, yes. We hear this every other week, don't we now? Ultimately, we had a case in this country where an individual who we were set to deport wasn't actually deported because a bunch of Labour Party MPs got together and said, how outrageous is this? The human rights of this individual are breached. And he wasn't deported. He went on to commit a very serious crime with a blade in this country. And there are instances like this where we're talking about an issue of national security, Calvin, and I don't think it's given the seriousness or acted with severity that it's actually required to keep the public safe. So the public watching this are totally in step with you, Calvin, and saying, I'm sick of hearing fancy words and rhetoric on this. I want action. And I think it's time that we got that.
And I'll come to you in a moment, Peter, but I think you're spot on here, Darren, in that the public don't feel safe and the public seem to be sick and tired of all these announcements without the action to back it up. But it seems that Priti Patel and Suella Braverman and Boris Johnson and all the Conservatives that are in touch with the public know this. So what do you think is the reason that nothing's happened so far?
Well, we're about to get into talk later on about the civil service, and I do think that there is a real stopgap in actually getting things done in the Home Office and in other departments because the civil service is swinging to the left, right? They think that anyone who argues for robust border controls is some kind of swivel-eyed bigot. Right. And there are so many ways in which even a Conservative Party with an 80-seat majority doesn't seem to be able to get a grip of Britain's borders. Look at the southern border right now. It's more open than a sponge. It's bizarre.
OK. Peter, I want tough borders. I want illegal immigrants deported. I want to make sure our country is safe. Am I a hard-right bigot?
No, I don't think you're a bigot at all, but I want to pick up on Darren's point, because I think Darren is making things up, essentially. To suggest that Labour MPs have any suggestion in interview immigration cases is not true. The laws are passed by Parliament, where there's a Conservative majority, and the law is enforced by police and the courts. So Labour MPs, they can appeal, just as Tories can appeal on behalf of individual cases, but it's not decided by members of Parliament. So that is a nonsense. In terms of what we've heard from the government today, my worry is that it's trying to re-announce a certain soundbite, essentially that there's a small boats crisis, so we're doing something. But there's already law against illegal immigrants. That's why it's called illegal migration. And then if government are trying to do anything that cuts across UN-enforced rights to asylum, they won't be allowed to, and it will be challenged and probably defeated in court. Finally, let's go back to Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges. One of the pledges wasn't to tackle the small boats crisis. The pledge was purely to pass some laws, which is a much narrower pledge. He's not saying, I'll fix the small boat crisis. He was saying, I'll pass some laws in Parliament, then something might happen afterwards. And I think this is Sunday newspaper territory. Tories feel we've got to say something, we've got to look tough. What does it actually lead to? OK,
I agree with you that it's some red meat that they're throwing out there, but Darren, I want to give you the opportunity to reply because Peter said you're making stuff up and it's nonsense.
Absolutely. There were a handful, more than a handful, Calvin, of Labour Party MPs that did sign a letter calling on this bloke and others to not be deported. It speaks to what Peter's chums in the Labour Party would actually do if they were in office, which is the square root of naff all, to be frank, when it comes to our borders.
How is that any different to the Conservatives?
Well, I agree with that. I accept that. But I think when you've got Yvette Cooper as Home Secretary standing up with posters virtue signalling saying refugees are welcome, well, actually, most of these people coming over aren't refugees, actually, in the definition that fair-minded people in Britain would be willing to accept. They're economic migrants in most cases, and the Labour Party, I think, would be the champion of these economic migrants.
So, Darren, briefly, just sorry to dive in.
Well, without getting into tit for tat for this, I'd rather bring you into something more constructive, Peter, on the ECHR and the UN. You mentioned that we can't implement any laws because we have superior laws to our own that are cutting through our illegal immigration problem. How do we get around that?
Well, that's not quite what I said. The British government can pass laws, but certain things that erode the rights of asylum seekers, I believe, will fall foul of the UN Charter. Your question, essentially, what can we do about it?
Yeah.
So I think about a year ago, Labour said we should have closer cooperation with France. Now Boris Johnson has gone and Liz Truss has gone. It looks like that's happening. And let's not be partisan about everything. Rishi Sunak has worked to establish a better relationship with the President of France. And I would say that's good for Britain, it's good for France, and it's good for safety. But maybe more working with partners and more actually trying to enforce the existing law rather than writing angry columns in Sunday newspapers is the answer.
Darren, what do you think is the answer to this?
Well, look, I mean, we've given the French more millions than I think Chanel probably, makes in any given year. I think it's ridiculous to suggest that President Macron has an interest in actually not allowing these boats to get into the English Channel, right? France clearly doesn't want these people either. They are economic migrants seeking to get to Britain to make a bit of money, and I don't blame them for wanting to do that. But ultimately, we are a nation state that should be able to enforce its own border policies. So we've got to actually look at globalist outfits like the UN and, frankly, like the ECHR and say that if Brexit was to mean anything, we've got to look at leaving the ECHR in particular, because we can't have a border policy or enforce a border policy without doing so.
For me, this was the point of Brexit. We shouldn't have no laws from a foreign land that are superseding laws in this land. If we say we want to deport illegal immigrants, we should be able to do so in our own country without the European Convention or the UN saying otherwise.
Well, Britain can.
But we're not.
Don't conflate asylum and illegal immigration. They're different things.
Who is?
Britain.
I said illegal immigrants.
Britain.
I didn't say asylum.
Britain can remove illegal immigrants. There's a separate point about challenges on asylum cases, but I don't think anyone reasonably could be against challenging asylum rulings.
But I think the only people conflating refugee claims and asylum seekers and illegal immigrants are these human rights lawyers, because most of the illegal immigrants we're trying to deport, they're saying, actually, no, they're refugees, they're asylum seekers. That's where the conflation's happening. That is the problem that we need to address. But thank you both. Peter and Darren will be here for our next debate, which is about the UK's most senior civil servant says that Sue Gray may have broken impartiality rules by secretly meeting with Keir Starmer. The Permanent Secretary at the Department of Education, Susan Ackland-Hood, told civil servants the appointment of Sue Gray as Sir Keir's Chief of Staff, quote, is a real challenge to acting in a way that deserves and retains the confidence of ministers. So I'm asking, does she have a point? Still with me is broadcaster Darren Grimes and former editor of the Labour List, Peter Edwards. Peter, I could not possibly be any less interested in the Sue Gray story. I don't know why we're still talking about it at this point. I think it's a massive distraction. What else is going on that we're not talking about? Why is Sue Gray still in the headlines?
Well, I'll give you one example of something that rarely gets talked about. I'd love to talk about another day. The rising and uncounted number of homeless people in Britain as we go into another cold snap. But, Sue Gray is kind of top of the news agenda. There's a lot of stuff across the Sunday newspapers today. What I'd say is, first of all, I think she'd be a great hire. And, she was head of proprietary and ethics. She wasn't head of ripping up the rule book and doing things my own way. She was head of ethics. But secondly, and I'm sure she'll be vindicated, I suspect what it comes down to is not the hire. It'll be when she first had contact with the Labour Party while still discharging her old role in the civil service. And that's going to come down to timelines, really. And obviously, I'd imagine we'll hear more about that in the next week or so.
Yeah, Darren, what do you think we're being distracted from right now?
Well, look, I mean, I want to talk about what the basket case that is the British economy, right? And actually how that serves the interests of the British people. I think Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng actually got some things right in saying that we need to go for growth. And I don't think we're having serious conversations about doing so. Why the Sue Gray story matters, though, I think because it comes down to a point of, Sue Gray was, as Peter rightly says, she was head of top cheese when it came to ethics in government and all the rest of it. And investigating the Partygate allegations against Boris Johnson, which, let's not forget, was partly responsible for bringing down a British Prime Minister, it smells to high heaven now. It looks really wrong because, as Peter rightly says, we don't know when the conversations with Sir Keir Starmer actually started. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer, there's a man, he made 10 pledges to get elected as Labour leader. He rolled back on all of those. He tried to get Jeremy Corbyn into office, not once but twice. He then rolled back on that. He said he wanted to stop Brexit, so much so that he was the architect of Labour's Brexit-denying second referendum policy. He's now rolled back on that as well. Is there anything that this man will actually stand for? If you ask me, getting Sue Gray in is just one so he can troll Boris Johnson, right? I don't think it's anything down to Sue Gray being a fantastic person for the Chief of Staff. I think this is all about winding up the Conservative Party, and it's clearly working.
Political one-upmanship. Is that what it is, Peter?
A lot of what Darren said is nonsense, but I won't go into it now.
You can't keep saying what everything Darren says is nonsense.
No, not everything.
Tell us why you disagree.
Just a lot. But hold on, I want to come back to the Sue Gray point in the report, because there's an element of rewriting history, not just from Darren, but again, across much of the media and Tory backbenchers today. So there's a suggestion that because of Sue Gray's transfer to the Labour Party, that her Partygate report is essentially devalued. But remember, when the Partygate report was published, Boris Johnson did not say, isn't Sue Gray wicked, she's being very tough on me. He said the opposite. He said, I've been vindicated. So when the report was published, Boris Johnson was happy with the findings. He should still be happy with the findings, regardless of Sue Gray's future career. When the report came out, Tory MPs, particularly Boris Johnson, were content. So it's therefore ludicrous for them to say the report that we accepted as helping us several months ago no longer help us because a single word of it has not been changed.
Darren, really quickly, you mentioned ethics in government. I think that's probably an oxymoron at this point. But the wider picture here is the civil service. Are they being politicised, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should we just go down, be overt with your politicisation?
Oh, well, look, I think the trust in civil servants is going to massively drop. I think that's been going on for years now. On so many issues, we've just been talking about the migrant issue, that there seems to be pushback in all levels of civil service. I mean, the Home Office civil servants actually try to take the government to court over policies that they put in place, policies that are overwhelmingly supported by the British public. So I don't think you can actually deny that there isn't inherent biases within much of the civil service. Don't get me wrong, fantastic members in there as well, people that do their jobs, don't give their views and actually want to deliver for the British people and ultimately for the Crown.
I'm with you on that. Thank you, Darren. That was broadcaster Darren Grimes and former editor of the Labour List, Peter Edwards. Thank you both for your time today. Plenty more to come this afternoon on my Common Sense Crusade. After the break, in the wake of the revelations coming out of the lockdown files this week, I spoke with historian Dr. David Starkey to discuss the history of civil liberties. That's coming up at 20 past. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We do have some much colder air on the way over the next 24 hours or so. Increasing risk of snow, but frost and ice as well. Looking at the bigger picture, and we can see the darker blues coming down from the Arctic, sweeping south through Monday and into Tuesday, bringing very cold air for the time of year, the start of spring, feeling more like winter again out there. This evening, though, there will be some clear spells, particularly across eastern parts of England. 1 or 2 mist and fog patches forming during the early hours. Elsewhere, quite cloudy, the risk of some showers. Showers turning increasingly to snow across parts of Scotland where some ice will form too. Temperatures falling close to, if not below freezing here. Elsewhere, again, temperatures close to freezing, perhaps a patchy frost where skies remain clear to start Monday morning. But a lot of cloud across England and Wales, some showery outbreaks of rain. This weather system here pushes southwards through the day, behind it turning much colder. Wintry showers, sleet and snow across Scotland, falling to some lower levels, leading to icy conditions in places. Sunny spells too, and here temperatures dropping away, falling to 1 or 2 Celsius across parts of Scotland. Perhaps highs just ahead of the frontal system of 9 or 10 degrees across the far south. Into the evening time, the weather front will start to slow down across parts of Wales, the Midlands, into southern England, and perhaps some longer spells of rain redeveloping here, some sleet and snow perhaps too as we move into the early hours of Tuesday. Elsewhere, we'll generally see clearing skies, snow showers around coastal areas, temperatures -5 to possibly near -10 Celsius across Scotland to start Tuesday morning. But a sunny start here, cloud with outbreaks of rain, sleet and perhaps some snow across southern counties of England as well, one to watch over the next 24 hours or so. But the day ahead, plenty of sunny spells and wintry showers further north. That stays similar over the next few days, temperatures remaining below average. See you again soon.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. This week we have seen many revelations from the Telegraph's exclusive lockdown files stories, which are based on Matt Hancock's leaked WhatsApp messages during the pandemic. I spoke with historian and broadcaster Dr. David Starkey about this and what he has to say about this politics. David, Boris Johnson used the analogy of war to describe the COVID pandemic and to justify the emergency powers that he used for measures. How accurate was this analogy, and do you think it was right that and proper parliamentary scrutiny was abandoned? MPs, after all, did vote in the emergency powers.
I think the use of the war analogy is where everything went wrong. The moment you claim something is a war, you, as it were, say everybody should get behind it. This is a matter of total national security. Dissent becomes treason. It is not the way that you conduct ordinary politics. And by the way, just to fan out from that, it seems to me to be exactly what's going wrong with how we're dealing with the so-called climate emergency. The moment you claim it's an absolute emergency, that we are facing a desperate circumstances, that it's a war on global warming, you stop thinking, you stop reflecting, you stop debating, you stop telling the truth. And we did all of that during lockdown. So I think the war analogy is where absolutely everything went wrong. Because, of course, I'm afraid something else goes along with that. You use propaganda. The first victim of war is truth. And there's another thing which I think, again, we need to put right down up there, up front. A state of permanent war was identified by George Orwell in 1984 as how the party maintained its control. It's the basis of that monstrous regime of 1984, which is permanent war. No one's quite sure in 1984, a bit like COVID actually, whether the war is real, whether the bombs that are falling, the rockets that are falling in London may actually be being dropped by the regime to maintain this perpetual sense of tension and danger. And of course, 1984 is also about the sacrifice of truth. What is the Ministry of Propaganda called? It's called the Ministry of Truth, which lies the whole of the time. And what we had during lockdown, it's now clear, Calvin, and it's profoundly shocking, is we had government by lies, by deliberate, calculated, coordinated lies. The lockdown files, I think, are the most disgraceful set of documents ever released, as it were, of British public life. They display an utter corruption of our politics. Interestingly enough, you know what? Again, one person, you mentioned Boris Johnson, one of very few people that emerges with any kind of credit is Johnson himself. There are two things that strike about, they're all WhatsApp messages. There are two things that strike about Johnson's messages. First, they are immeasurably more literate than everybody else's. Here is somebody who is reading, God, I'm going to say astonishing things about Boris. Here is somebody who's reading, is thinking, is criticising the information that he's receiving, but he's not doing it enough. He lacks the confidence to carry it through. The other thing that's utterly shocking is that these are the activities of a conservative government, of a government that is supposedly committed to Britain, to England, to our astonishing record of personal freedom, to a light touch from the state, to a police which is not a police state, but is supposedly an arm of the citizenry and there only to enforce the law, not current government policy. All of those were simply thrown out of the window. This is because you have conservatives, and I'm afraid here Boris is as guilty as everybody else, who aren't, have got no grounding, have got no roots, don't really know why they're there. Disgrace.
Well, you touched on a lot of important topics there. The idea of perpetual war, which I would suggest the West is engaging in right now. The Ministry of Truth, pushing forward propaganda. We could look at the Nudge Unit and the Trusted News Initiative and all of that. But I think going back to the source of a lot of this, government, not just government, Parliament gave up the idea of being able to dissent, gave up the idea of being able to challenge the government in voting in these emergency powers. Why do you think they did that in the first place, undermining proper parliamentary procedure?
For the simple reason it's war. The moment, remember, in the Second World War, ordinary democratic politics were suspended. You had a coalition government. Everybody pulled in together because the important thing was to defeat the Germans. I mean, at least as much responsible for everything that went wrong as the government is, of course, the opposition. The utterly craven behaviour of Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, I'm afraid, as we know now, really loves control. He really loves controlling things. He was in his absolute element with lockdown. If you'll remember, every day he got up and he called for more of it. He called for it to go on longer. He called for it to go on and be more intense. Of course, this mysterious thing called the so-called science, which we can now see was an utter panic-stricken fabrication based on bad science, worse mathematics, and disgraceful argument.
Dr. David Starkey there with his thoughts. You can see the full video on our YouTube channel. Still with me in the studio is former editor of the Labour List, Peter Edwards. Peter, what are your thoughts on the comments made there by David Starkey, particularly on Starmer's stance on lockdowns?
Well, David's a very clever man and he's saying some very unwise things. I think he devalues his cause by personalising it, saying Keir Starmer loves control. I mean, just that doesn't stand up to facts. Let's make a couple of points about lockdown. First of all, 3 years on from the first lockdown, there was a massive and continues to be a massive and ferocious debate, and it hasn't split on party political lines. As you alluded to in your intro, you had the leader of the Labour Party generally supporting lockdowns, and a majority of the public as well, and a majority of the public, but then a split in the Conservative Party with very terrier-like people like Steve Baker launching the, I think it was the COVID research group, but it's essentially sceptics. The other point I'd make is there were lockdowns across the world, in Britain, in France, in Italy, in America. Okay. This is not some peculiarly British phenomenon.
All right, doesn't mean it's a good thing. But it's interesting that you challenged David Starkey on his ad hominems and then use ad hominems against David Starkey. That's fine.
I haven't said anything personal.
Peter, thank you very much. You are with GB News on TV, radio and online. And after the break, I'll be breaking down the latest findings from Matt Hancock's leaked WhatsApp messages. Today, The Telegraph revealed how the former Health Secretary hoped to shock public into complying with the ever-changing lockdown rules. Now it's time for a check on those news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Calvin, thank you very much. It's 3:33. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The former health secretary wanted to, quote, frighten the pants off the public. That's according to leaked WhatsApp messages sent during the COVID pandemic. The latest WhatsApp conversation published in the Sunday Telegraph shows Matt Hancock discussing how to use another strain of the COVID virus to scare the public. Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth told us Mr Hancock's political career is over.
I think the key thing is that he accounts for himself in front of an inquiry. It comes back to this point, doesn't it? Why we need this inquiry to take place quickly. A lot of people lost their lives. There's a lot of people who think that the way in which lockdowns operated has had long-term implications on all kinds of fronts. Everybody wants an inquiry because everybody wants to be able to see the evidence, to be able to debate it properly and calmly, and it's why we need to get on with it.
Rail passengers could see their season ticket go up by hundreds of pounds from today in the largest train fare hike for more than a decade. Ticket prices across England and Wales are rising by an average of 5.9%, despite strikes and cancellations that have brought parts of the UK to a standstill. Rail Minister Hugh Merriman says the increase is below inflation, but Labour has called it savage. Travel editor at The Sun, Lisa Minot, told us the government and rail companies have to look at tempting a different type of traveller post-pandemic.
Got one of the oldest railway systems in the world, but on top of that, not a huge amount of investment has been put into it over the years. And there's decades worth of investment that needs to be put into them to get the services far more reliable so that people are actually able to rely on the railway system and use it and feel they can use it without worrying about ever getting to their point of destination.
And clashes have broken out in Athens between police and demonstrators over a train crash that killed 57 people. Thousands of university students and railway workers have taken to the streets to voice their anger over safety standards on the rail network. More than 350 people were on board the train when it crashed head-on into a freight train last Tuesday. It's the deadliest train crash in Greece's history. Its government has vowed to investigate and improve rail safety. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone.
My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. The latest leak from the lockdown files reveals that Matt Hancock suggested they, quote, frighten the pants off everyone. The then Health Secretary wasn't the only one trying to scare the public into compliance. The leaked messages show several members of Mr. Hancock's team wanted to utilise fear and guilt to make people obey lockdown. To give us a quick outline of what's come out of this in GB News is GB News' political reporter, Olivia Utley. Olivia, is this proof of Project Fear? What is this?
Well, it's not a good look for the government and for Matt Hancock in particular. I think one thing that hasn't been picked up on that much is not just the content of these messages, it's also the tone of these messages. The sort of, when Simon Case and Matt Hancock are in a conversation and Simon Case thinks it's hilarious, in quotes, that a number of holidaymakers have been quarantined in shoebox-size hotel rooms for having the audacity to come over to the UK. Another element which hasn't been picked up on that much is perhaps, given that Matt Hancock's political career was already over, he's already said that he didn't want to stand at the next election, perhaps the biggest victim of the biggest scalp of the lockdown files might be Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, because there are a number of really quite worrying elements to the way that he behaved. He called the Prime Minister an untrusted figure. Which is not what you'd expect from the head of the civil service. He accused, and it definitely was framed as an accusation, the business secretary of pure conservative ideology when he was worried about restrictions for COVID, which would inflict ever more damage on the economy. And these are the sort of comments about elected politicians that one really wouldn't expect from the leading civil servant, in fact. And of course, it comes at a time when we're already seeing pressure and scrutiny on the civil service because of the decision of Sue Gray to accept the role offered to her by Keir Starmer.
It's that comment this afternoon that's come out, isn't it, that he was saying that Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister at the time, was a nationally distrusted figure. Now, is that a statement or an opinion? Well,
what he was saying, in context, it was that he felt that lockdown messaging should be... the face of lockdown, essentially, shouldn't be the Prime Minister. It should be someone trusted rather than a universally distrusted figure like the Prime Minister. Now, that just, whatever light you want to throw on it, that does not seem to be an acceptable phrase for a servant of the Crown to use. So it'll be very, very interesting to see if Simon Case survives this scandal. And let's not forget, it's not the only scandal that Simon Case has been involved in. He was the Cabinet Secretary who oversaw the appointment of Richard Sharp, who managed to broker that deal, if we can phrase it like that, between a donor and Boris Johnson. So there's already been quite a bit of scrutiny on Simon Case, and it'll be fascinating to see whether he can survive this.
I think it's interesting that his might be the head that rolls. Convenient, you could almost say. That was GB News' political reporter, Olivia Utley. Thank you very much, Olivia. Joining me now is the Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University and clinical epidemiologist, Professor Carl Hennigan. You had an article published in the Sunday Express today, a fantastic article, by the way. Thank you very much for that. Can you tell me what your argument was there?
Well, I think the major issue here is that as you see people setting out the issues, I think we're all surprised at the tone, the content, issues like the unethics of all this. But the key here is to prevent this happening again. And what was the key bit of the legislation? I think you mentioned it earlier, Calvin. The Coronavirus Act put all of the responsibility into a few people's hands, and particularly it was those who shouted loudest. And I know Graham Brady made a big say of this in September, October 2020, trying to get some parliamentary debate. But when we look back in the light of day in 2020, there were over 200 different measures. They were changing weekly. People didn't know what the measures were, couldn't even remember what they are. And in the light of day, when you look back, it's just as ridiculous, these repressive measures. Therefore, what needs to happen is we need some sea change in the legislation to prevent a coronavirus act ever happening again. And there's a good example of this is Sweden, because the government was not allowed to interfere with the government agency's business in Sweden. If they wanted to do that, they would have had to have had Parliament to look at the issues and change some of the laws. So we need a big push on this because there's nothing to stop a Matt Hancock 2, if you like, in the future.
Professor, I do agree, but I think the problem here is that the government took Parliament out of the question anyway. They made this entirely small executive that was entirely unchallenged. I mean, the piece, I'm going to read a small sentence from your article. We should also ensure no government can persecute its citizens for lawfully expressing doubts about its policies. The government had powers that the government shouldn't have because it broke our constitution. Is that not the case?
Yeah, because what they said is the Public Health Act wasn't fit for purpose. Well, it was fit for purpose. What they wanted to do was overwrite that with new legislation to create an executive right at the heart of Cabinet Office who can make decisions on the fly. And that's what has happened here is it's all gone to WhatsApp messages and said, what can we do by tomorrow? And then you've got everybody in parties having a drink thinking, let's make up some new rules tomorrow. Let's have a rule of 6. And there was no debate to look at that issue. I'm sure if we'd have had parliamentary debate, we'd have been able to look at this in a different light. Now, key to all of this in 2020 is the misguided view that you could suppress this virus out of existence. And that's where you get people going, we're going on a war footing. Any virologist, any epidemiologist, any medical person worth his salt looked at that very early on, that policy, and said, I'm sorry, that is just misguided. What happened here is there's so many overnight experts who thought they had the simplistic answer to suppress this out of existence that we went on this ridiculous war footing. And it's right about this idea is that somehow a skeptic is a bad thing. Just think about what a skeptic is. They're open-minded. They can change their viewpoints of mind, and they seek to challenge the status quo and ask questions about ideas and beliefs. Well, to be honest, we need more skeptics in the world.
Yeah, they painted skeptics as hard right, which is beyond a doubt. It's ridiculous. But is this, people are suggesting this could be limited hangout. Is the bigger issue here not vaccine injuries, the situation with midazolam, what went on in the care homes? Are these not the bigger issues that we're not addressing because we're focused so much on the information we have been given through this leak?
Well, look, I think there's big questions to ask. When you see there's still people, I heard the chat before talking about, still got an ideology about lockdowns working. Look, lockdowns did nothing for care homes. And there's a big question to ask about what actually led to a third of deaths in care homes. I personally work as an urgent care GP. I can tell you in 2020 when I was going into care homes, complete abandonment of patients, lack of care. I was really concerned that the usual, what I call the individual who looks after the grandchild, the son, the daughter who goes in, makes sure they eat and drink, completely disappeared. And that really concerns me. Second, did nothing for hospital-acquired infections. We still need a big investigation there to say, why were 40% of people still getting this in hospital? Lockdown did nothing for that. So you're right, Calvin, to say, in the inquiry, we just can't take it as a done deal that lockdown somehow saved life when actually they have potentially significant harmful effects that need investigations to look at what's going on.
Hear, hear. Thank you very much for that. That was Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University and clinical epidemiologist Professor Carl Hennigan. Thank you very much for your time today. Still with me is former editor of The Labour List, Peter Edwards. Peter, how do you respond to what the professor just said?
I was concerned that someone whose kind of title is evidence-based, that there was so much opinion there rather than facts. I just want to make a couple of points. So first of all, when we had the lockdown in around December 21, so a year and a half into the pandemic, there was majority support for that, okay? So there was majority support. The idea that somehow this was forced on the people when there was majority backing for it just doesn't stack up. And then there's a bit of a narrative, perhaps across the elements of the interview we just heard, in certain newspapers, perhaps like The Express and so on occasionally, that we're being undemocratic. But agree with it or not, but the politicians who passed these laws were elected by the British public.
Yeah, you can say that about a dictator who's elected. Just because someone's elected does not mean what they do is democratic. But thank you anyway for that perspective. That was former editor of The Labour List, Peter Edwards. Thank you for your time today. Before we move on today, let's have a look at what you've had to say about the topics we've discussed. On Rishi Sunak's plan to tackle channel migration, Andy says, if we can't control our borders because of the UN laws or the ECHR, how do other countries do it, such as Poland? Exactly. Thank you, Andy, for raising that. If only some of our politicians could look further afield into countries like Poland, where they are doing fantastic things. Danny says, how are we a sovereign nation if a foreign body can overrule British law? Indeed. Again, one of the reasons I voted for Brexit was to protect our sovereignty. It's a shame our politicians aren't following through. Darryl says, the recent statement from Rishi Sunak sounds great. However, I don't think it will be implemented or happen. I think it will face too many stumbling blocks, will struggle through Parliament and get blocked by the Lords. Even if it gets that far, Daryl, it's still the human rights lawyers who will make sure that nothing ever happens. Thank you very much for sending in your thoughts. Please continue to do so. Now, one of the venues which recently hosted a cabaret drag-style event for parents and young children has vowed to continue hosting shows despite a growing campaign against them online. Viewers and listeners of GB News will know my opinion on this matter. I think it's inappropriate for adult entertainment to be performed in front of babies and young children. But I wanted to get a different perspective on this, so we've invited drag queen Vanity Von Glow onto the show. Tom, thank you very much for joining me.
Hello, nice to be here. This isn't the first conversation about appropriate behaviour that I've had with a man in a collar, so I'm looking forward to...
Interesting. I won't get into that. But what I will ask you is, do you think it's appropriate for drag acts to be performed in front of children?
Well, first of all, it's important for me to say, because I have made a defence of drag queen story art on this channel and others in recent times, on the basis that drag queen story time in the UK, in the instances that I've seen it, is not a striptease-style burlesque show. That's a different conversation from the Cabba Baba Rave conversation that's in the news today, which I think is what we're talking about. So I just want to make that clear, they are slightly different. I
wouldn't recognise in what way they're different, so that might be...
Well, a striptease burlesque show, which is what the Cabba Baba Rave has, the videos that you've seen of people doing the splits and doing rope work and stuff, that's different from although I couldn't think of anything worse than reading to children, but if I were to sit and read books to a kid in an acceptable dress, that's a different type of show, right? I think there's a valid discussion about what's appropriate for young children in a liberal society, but we also have a society where parental discretion is a factor when it comes to whether or not their kids will listen to gangster rap, or whether they're allowed to swear in the house, or watch 18-rated movies, or drink at a family wedding. And I think that for these mums who are enjoying a cabaret show that they can take their babies to and have them present, while it's okay to have a conversation about whether or not that's appropriate, there's been a quantum leap to this makes me feel uneasy and it's inappropriate to the language of this is grooming, this is paedophilia, this is child abuse. And that's the part of it that concerns me.
OK, I'm with you. So parents do have a lot of responsibility. I agree with you on that. Society as a whole also has a bit of a responsibility there. But to the question of is this grooming, is this paedophilia, I think people would ask, well, what is the motivation? Why are these burlesque-style, strip-style acts being performed in front of children? I mean, we could say parents shouldn't take them there, but why are they happening in the first place? Why would the performers want to do that?
Well, careful not to speak on behalf of young mothers, but I'm aware that a lot of the mums attending that Cabba Baba Rave are sick of reading the wheels on the bus to their kids. You know, they've been locked up for 2 years because of a pandemic. They were gestating for 9 months. They want to go out and have a drink with their fellow mums during the day when they don't have to hire a babysitter and watch the type of shows they used to watch before they had a baby. So I can understand why a 20 or 30-something mum would enjoy the show and would think this is something that isn't going to have a terrible, long-lasting traumatic effect on a baby who doesn't actually have a clue what it is that they're watching. You know, I know some of the performers that are involved in this particular show, and I'm worried about the hyperbole of suspicion around their intentions. What could they possibly want to do? They're performers. They enjoy performing. You know, I'm sure you would sympathise with this, that there are some people on the progressive left for whom it sticks in their craw to condemn the death threats that J.K. Rowling faces. They just can't bring themselves to condemn those death threats. I don't struggle to condemn death threats, and I condemn the death threats against these performers from people that are calling them paedophiles and groomers. Would you be comfortable condemning that type of...
Nobody should receive death threats, absolutely. The problem I face is that I can't show on this TV show right now, I cannot show any of the footage of the stuff we're talking about because it is deemed inappropriate for this time of the day. I'm literally not legally allowed to show it.
Well, that's because...
However, people are taking babies and toddlers and young children to these shows.
Well, a broadcaster is held to a higher standard.
Shouldn't society be held to that same high standard?
Well, I think it's okay to have the discussion about that, about what is appropriate. You know, I wouldn't do this type of show myself. I don't perform striptease in my show, thank God. You know, I'm a singer, a pianist, a comic. Strangely enough, here I am defending, to some extent, these types of shows because even though I'm not involved with them, and it's not the type of show I do, I think that there's almost a bad faith suspicion that underpins the concern that some people are expressing about it. And that kind of worries me in a more broad societal sense because You know, I've faced down cancel culture mobs myself. I think that cancel culture gives a free pass to righteous mobs, and that's what this has the flavour of for me.
I've campaigned heavily against cancel culture.
Yeah.
However, I'd be very cautious of anyone saying what you just said, because it sounds like gaslighting. We should always be suspicious of people that want to spend time around young children, most especially when they're half nude and or doing some kind of burlesque act. Of course we should be suspicious. And to not be suspicious, I think, would be negligent of us as adults.
What is it that you think that... also interesting, because it's a cabaret show. Obviously, I'm a cabaret artist. Part of cabaret, I work in this drag.
I imagine you perform for over 18s.
Yeah, my shows are in bars and clubs and nightclubs.
Yeah.
I mean, I do a lot of weddings, and there's sometimes kids at weddings, but the type of show you do at weddings, I'm coming out and singing Celine Dion, The Power of Love, and everybody cries.
Well, just one last question before you go, because there was a drag act that performed, well, actually taught sex ed in a school and taught kids that there were 73 genders, and actually sent a kid out for saying, no, there are 2 genders. Do you think that's appropriate?
Well, the 72 genders thing isn't the church I pray at. I mean, in a liberal society, we're all allowed to have our faith systems. My faith, by the way, is Shania Twain and Celine Dion.
Well, thank you. I've got to move on, but Tom, thank you for sharing your perspective today. It's been very helpful. That was drag queen Vanity Von Glow. We reached out to the Vault Festival, the organisers of the drag show. They gave this response to some of the criticisms they've received. Quote, "We are aware of comments on social media directed at Kaba Baba Rave, part of the 2023 Vault Festival programme. The cabaret show is designed for parents with sensory moments for babies and is a fun and welcoming space for parents and with young babies. Vault Festival exists to support live performance and artistic talent and is proud to platform events that are welcoming and accessible for all, with audience safety always as a top priority. We stand against the inexcusable threats of violence and assault and against our programmed artists, our staff, and directed at the LGBTQ+, IA+ community, and are supporting the affected artists." There's another letter in there now. Each week on the show, we like to end with a closing prayer, and here is our collect for the second Sunday in Lent. "Almighty God, who seest that we have no power of ourselves to help ourselves, keep us both outwardly in our bodies and inwardly in our souls, that we may be defended from all adversities which may happen to the body and from all evil thoughts which may assault and hurt the soul. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen." You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. I will be back next Sunday at 3 p.m. Nana Okoye is up next, but before that, here's the weather forecast. God bless. Have a good week. There's Fault.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We do have some much colder air on the way over the next 24 hours or so. Increasing risk of snow, but frost and ice as well. Looking at the bigger picture, and we can see the darker blues coming down from the Arctic, sweeping south through Monday and into Tuesday, bringing very cold air for the time of year, the start of spring, feeling more like winter again out there. This evening, though, there will be some clear spells, particularly across eastern parts of England. 1 or 2 mist and fog patches forming during the early hours. Elsewhere, quite cloudy, the risk of some showers. Showers turning increasingly to snow across parts of Scotland, where some ice will form too. Temperatures falling close to, if not below, freezing here. Elsewhere, again, temperatures close to freezing, perhaps a patchy frost where skies remain clear to start Monday morning. But a lot of cloud across England and Wales, some showery outbreaks of rain. This weather system here pushes southwards through the day, behind it turning much colder. Wintry showers, sleet and snow across Scotland, falling to some lower levels, leading to icy conditions in places. Sunny spells too, and here temperatures dropping away, falling to 1 or 2 Celsius across parts of Scotland. Perhaps highs just ahead of the frontal system of 9 or 10 degrees across the far south. Into the evening time, the weather front will start to slow down across parts of Wales, the Midlands, into southern England, and perhaps some longer spells of rain redeveloping here, some sleet and snow perhaps too as we move into the early hours of Tuesday. Elsewhere, we'll generally see clearing skies. Snow showers around coastal areas, temperatures -5 to possibly near -10 Celsius across Scotland to start Tuesday morning. But a sunny start here, cloud with outbreaks of rain, sleet and perhaps some snow across southern counties of England as well, one to watch over the next 24 hours or so. But the day ahead, plenty of sunny spells and wintry showers further north. That stays similar over the next few days, temperatures remaining below average. See you again soon.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's